but it's not falling in the earlier categories, neither is it a state-owned enterprise, so to speak. So if you have other bodies within your register of members, then you have to find out who are the beneficial owners for that body corporate. And last but not least, the individuals themselves. This is the person we are interested in, such that if we were going through A to G, what we are looking for is there an individual behind this legal person that meets any one of the 4 criteria? And that individual is then the person register. Now, we have those members that have a chain of ownership, so that from the Kenyan entity to the individual, you could have maybe 5, 10, 15, 20 legal persons before you go to the natural person. Now, the corporate bodies or nominees in between are not material. What we are interested in is the very last person who exercises the ultimate control over the Kenyan entity. Now, some pointers are to be entered in the register of BOs. Please don't say it's a listed company in New York, so we put the listed company in our register. That should not be the case. We will address scenarios where in that ultimate corporate body, there is no single individual who qualifies as a beneficial owner under when evaluated against the 4 criteria set in the regulations. Now, where the controller of Kenyan company is a legal person, it is advisable for the practitioner to obtain the following as part of due diligence. If it's a limited company, probably you'll get a certificate of incorporation. Depending on jurisdiction, it could be certificate of registration. It's always important to get a copy of the memorandum and articles of association or its equivalent. Other jurisdictions, they call them constitution. Some places they call them statutes. So get the equivalent of our memorandum and articles of association. Do get the list of directors or trustees for the legal person provided by an officer of that entity, and the list of their shareholders together with percentages. If it's a listed company, you can get the list of top 10 shareholders, which is already in a lot of jurisdiction a public record. And from that list, you can establish whether there is someone who meets any of the 4 criteria set under the Act. The list of beneficial owners, for example, if you are getting a company from the UK, they are already disclosing beneficial ownership. You can request them to share that with you, or you can download this from their company's house website. For other jurisdiction, you may not have the public access as we do for UK, but you can request for that information to be provided to you if it is public, if it's publicly available. Now, the BO disclosure should be built into a company's annual compliance requirements. The way you ask companies every year whether they have any indebtedness for you to include in the annual return, or the way you request for financials so that you can attend to annual compliance requirements for your companies that don't hold physical meetings. If the company is holding physical meetings, then you build this into the compliance reporting, probably at the last quarter board meeting, so that this information is updated as and when you close the compliance issues for the company. Where the company has a compliance policy, you might want this included as an amendment to that policy at the next or future board meetings. So the messaging here is it should be built into the psyche of the company that this is something they need to look at year in, year out. The particulars then, that once you've identified that individual who meets any of the 4 set criteria, you need to obtain these particulars: full name, the ID number. Under ID number, we are putting birth certificate, ID, and passport. Now, please do note that minors can also be beneficial owners. Where a minor is entitled to more than 10% of the shares of the company, then they need to be entered as a beneficial owner of the company. There are issues on privacy issues arising out of this, which are being addressed by the access controls to the register itself. And we also should take note of that. We need to record the nationality, PIN certificate if they are resident. So this would apply to Kenyan citizens and also foreign residents. The full address, we put postal residential for individuals, or the registered address through which this person could be reached. The date of birth, occupation or profession, telephone number, and email address. Now, a copy of the asterisk document should be provided for verification. So when you are going through the verification process, the ID number and PIN certificate should be verified. For a minor, you might need to have this verified separately if it's local. If it's a foreigner, then you might need to have that notarized from source. Once you've identified the person, then you have to identify their interest in the company. Now, in identification of the interest, we have to establish what is the nature of ownership or control. What is the percentage ownership? What is the percentage voting rights? What is the, do they have right to appoint or remove a director? Or do they exercise significant control over the company? Now, in addition to identifying that, we have to then say the person started being a beneficial owner. For companies that were in existence when the BO regulations were commenced, the date of commencement of the regulations is the date of becoming a beneficial owner, and we will address that in the next few slides. Now, where you are filing a change, then we need to indicate the date that this person ceased to be a beneficial owner. This can happen on transfer of shares, where they no longer hold an interest in the company, or through dilution, where someone was holding 10%, but they've been diluted and they have now ceased being a beneficial owner. Now you put the date of that dilution or the date of exit from the company. Any other relevant detail the registrar may from time to time require. Under this segment, the only document currently the registrar requires is the passport size photograph, which is not listed under the required information, but when you go online, you're required to upload. So I think that's the only additional information, but please keep in mind that the registrar has powers to require further documentation when you are doing these processes. So whatever then the registrar requests from you, then you should provide it. And that brings us to the end on our discussions on the BO regulations. The next segment is the guide on disclosure of information. Simon, is there any question relating to the regulations?
Yes, Malachi, there are quite a number of questions. So the identification of a beneficial owner under the fourth criteria, that is influence, significant exercise of significant influence, it seems is not yet clear. It seems to me that since the Act assumes every company must have a BO, then where no natural person under natural person is caught under A, B, or C, then D comes into play, the person in control. So the question, Malachi, here is around exercise of significant influence. Would you just elaborate that a bit more?
So I gave you the example under significant influence of a founder. So the person of interest under D is that person who the board defers to for direction. And without that direction, the board cannot proceed. So for example, you could get a scenario where there are certain financial plans or budgets that if the founder does not sign off, then the board's hands are tied. Please do note, this does not include just CEOs and the directors on the basis that the directors are alone. They have to be able to exercise that single-handed control and influence over the company. Now, the misconception that the company, there is a misconception that a company must have a beneficial owner. Now, it is true, there is a beneficial owner. Whether you have 1% or 2%, you are a beneficial owner of that percentage you are owning. But for as long as you are holding less than 10%, you are not a reportable beneficial owner. I am aware that the registry do accept submissions that do not have a beneficial owner. So I think what we will do at the tail end of this process is to show you where there is no one who holds 10%, how do you go about it to notify the registrar that there is no one. So I think that should address this question, Simon, when we come to a real life example on how to go about filing a nil return.
Okay. All right. So I guess most of the other questions will be answered as we go on. But there's a question around the position of companies registered before 2015, and they're not captured on eCitizen. You would need, as we said, to link these companies to their directors and shareholders. What does the term not linked, and how does one link the company? I believe there should be you know, a write-up on this somewhere on the BRS website. So just look for, just go to brs.go.k. But basically the process is linking the directors and shareholders to their particular companies. On the question of companies that do not appear online, unfortunately, you would need to follow up directly with BRS. If you're outside of Nairobi, then emails and phone calls will help. Like I said earlier, we'll be sharing contacts, email addresses for the various departmental heads at BRS shortly. I'll just type that to your question. So hopefully you would you'd be able to just get that answered. In the event that there is a delay, there is an escalation mechanism, there's an escalation email to the executive, to the CEO of BRS. So I think, Malachi, we are okay to continue on the next, because I think all this will be answered as we proceed.
Okay, so there is a draft guide on disclosure of beneficial ownership information that has been circulated by the registrar. Was it sometime in December, Simon?
Yes, December.
For those members who have not seen this, we highly suggest when we share the folder with this information, you take some time and go through the guide, because some of the questions we receive from our members are clearly addressed on how to go about them in the guide. Now, what the guide does, basically, it gives you a step-by-step process on how to go about the identification, obtaining of information, and updating of the beneficial owner information. And it also has some template notices that members can adopt to address their compliance needs. So it is a very useful resource. It's still in draft, but it's usable. The information is usable. So please take your time and do go through it to find out what to do. Now, there is a beneficial ownership Irregister manual, which is a step-by-step guide developed by the eCitizen team. It's downloadable from the BRS website. We will also include this in the folder that we will share with you. Now, it has two sections. The first section deals with how you go about adding beneficial owners when you are registering a new company. The second part 2 of it deals with those companies that are already in existing. Now you need to update their beneficial owner information. So for those people who have no idea how to do how to use the eCitizen portal to generate from BOF1, which is the register for beneficial owners being submitted to the registrar, this is a very useful resource for you. You don't need to call anyone when you go through this step by step to meet your needs. Coming on
Malaka,
the issue.
there's an interesting question that I just feel we need to address. Should a company secretary be registered as a BO?
How now?
If you exercise significant control, that would be the only way you would qualify as a BO. So in practice, no. You're an officer of the company and not a beneficial owner. But then it could be.
I think we need to explore this further, because I don't know. I'm yet to come across a scenario where the company secretary is bossing everyone around, including the board of directors and the CEO, and those the other officers of the company cannot do anything unless the CS gives the go-ahead. It's highly unlikely. I would say impossible, if I may.
Yeah. It's highly unlikely. Again, Mr. David Kamau asks, in the case of a company where the listed directors on the members of the company are nominees, that right there answers your question. If the directors are nominees, then they're not beneficial owners. You would need to.
And Simon, I think we also need to address the issue of directors being in the articles or memorandum. It's not right. The people in the memorandum or articles are not directors. They are shareholders. They are subscribers. They are shareholders. So
yes.
Directors are not in the first instance the people we are interested in when we are doing BO compliance. We peg our analysis on their ownership interest, but not on directorship interest, so to speak.
Yeah. I think it's important to mention that the information, and I know we'll mention this earlier, but because of some questions I've seen, it's good that we mention that this BO information is private. It's not available to the public unless you're one of the authorities that is allowed to access this information. So therefore, if you have filed information and you do not see that information, it is because that information is private. And there is a reason the BRS I decided to do this portal online so that they could be able to what's the word, manage the privacy of that information. So the information is not available on the front end. The information is available to the beneficial owners, the shareholders, and directors, and not anyone else that's not party of that company. Malachi.
Thank you. So there is the issue of the effective date. We did have a discussion with the BRS. This has been inbuilt into the system. You cannot pick a date earlier than 21st February 2020 when you are doing the effective date of becoming a beneficial owner. The reason being the law cannot be applied retroactively. So the requirement for BO disclosure crystallized when the BO regulations were gazetted. And they were gazetted on the 21st of February 2020, and that then becomes the effective date for companies that were in existence as of that date. If you are registering your company today, then today is the effective date. If the transfer of shares or allotment happened after 21st of February, then the date of that transaction that crystallized interest in the company becomes the effective date. So please, if you are doing your transfer if you did your transfer last month, or you are doing it next month, Don't use 21st February 2020 as the effective date because it's misleading. So it is 21st being the earliest, and then the date of transaction later than that will be the effective date for you. Compliance cutoff of 31st January 2021 is now 31st of July. There is a further public notice to this effect. Now, I did hear that there were a lot of applications the second and fourth week of January. Then on the first week of February, the people who are still making applications were now very few. Now, being the Kenyans that we are, we do urge our fellow practitioners, please don't wait until the second, third, and fourth week of July to address this. Ongoing compliance, if you do it now, there's a chance you'll get it reviewed sooner and approved sooner, and you providing the confirmation to your clients much sooner than waiting for the deadline when there is now a crunch. On identification of beneficial owners, we are going to address a few scenarios on how to identify beneficial owners. But before we go to that, I saw a few interesting questions we might need to address. There's an interesting question. Someone is asking, who is the beneficial owner of an NGO? This is not part of our scenarios, but we will address it once we've gone through the scenarios. How long does it take BRS to verify BO application? Because of the number of applications the registry received in January, there has been a delay. But before that increased numbers, I was seeing this happening within 1 to 2 weeks time, you have it confirmed. So I don't think BRS is verifying the BO information. They are just checking to confirm that the form BOF1 is properly completed. But they don't go behind the scene and verify the information that that person is indeed a beneficial owner. On the identification of a minor as a beneficial owner, a participant has rightfully pointed out that currently you can't appoint a minor in the system, but these are some of the issues which will be addressed in the second development phase for this workflow. Anything else, Simon?
There's a question from Malakai Adede asking when you're registering a new company, if the shareholder is a private company, there's no option for direct ownership. That is because, you know, as a private entity, as a corporate, you cannot have direct ownership. The people, whatever ownership, the people behind the corporate, the private company, would have to be declared and at the next phase as indirect owners. I hope that answers that. There are a couple of questions that I see will come up around the change in the system by BRS to require, when you're at incorporation, that all shares must be issued. I think that is something that a deliberation, the discussion that is going on, please, that would best be addressed at the JLC, at the Joint Liaison Committee, and not in this forum of beneficial owners. So I think we can now start off on the scenarios. There are many questions. How do you treat parastatals? How do you treat circles? How do you treat societies and clubs? I think we will now look at them at this time. So Malak, I think we can carry on.
So in the identification of the beneficial owners, just to reiterate, we are looking at 4 criteria. On whether the person holds at least 10% of the issued shares, directly or indirectly, whether the person exercises at least 10% of the voting rights, directly or indirectly, whether the person single-handedly has a right to appoint or remove a director, either directly or indirectly, whether the person single-handedly exercises significant influence or control over the company, either directly or indirectly. So in essence, we have 8 parameters we need to look at. If you look at the fact that it could be direct or indirect. I see 2 participants have raised their hands.
Yes. I was hoping I will request that we put them down. I will give us a moment to ask questions towards the tail end, kindly.
Okay. Okay. So I put an asterisk on having a right to appoint or remove a director. And I had explained this earlier on, but it doesn't harm to reiterate. Please note that the right to appoint or remove a director is distinct from the right to vote at the AGM for the appointment or removal of directors. The right must be specific to the individual shareholder or person. If it's not specific, then that does not qualify that person as a beneficial owner. So in our first scenario, we are looking at your happy scenario where you have a company owned by a number of individuals with a certain percentage of shares. So in our evaluation, we look at company A with Mr. A, Mr. B, Mr. C, Mr. D, and Mr. E as the shareholders, and the percentages are shown. Now, in assessing against the 4 criteria, we identify Mr. D with this 45% directly as a beneficial owner. So we then go to the next step of requesting them to provide any further information that may be necessary. For example, if Mr. D is just a shareholder, we would not have his residential address information with us. So then we reach out to request for the further information that we need to onboard him as a beneficial owner. We also identify Mr. C with this 30% shareholding as a beneficial owner. And lastly, we identify Mr. B with 10.01% as a beneficial owner. Please do note that we are going to ignore Mr. A, even though if we were to round off, it would be 10. There is no rounding off of ownership, so that a 9.99% would not be a beneficial owner for purposes of meeting compliance requirements. So in brief, Mr. B, Mr. C, and Mr. D are beneficial owners of the company, and they have met the first criteria, directly more than 10% shareholding. Now, do remember that we have 4 criteria. The moment a person meets 1, they are a beneficial owner. They could meet 2, 3, or 4 of them, but the only requirement is for you to meet 1, and automatically you become a beneficial owner. We could have the same company structure, but not as straightforward as the earlier scenario we have explained. So still company A, same shareholding structure, same shareholding percentages, but the shareholders themselves, you could have a company B as one of the shareholders. Now, we will start with the first tier of shareholders, the legal shareholders, and ask ourselves, are there any individuals who meets any of the criteria provided? Then in our evaluation, we find Mr. C with the 45% meets the first criteria, they become a beneficial owner. Mr. B with 30% meets the criteria. But when we go to company B that meets 10%, we do not identify company B as a beneficial owner. Then we do request further information for company B to tell us whether behind them there is any individual who meets any of the 4 criteria given. And in this case, Mr. E owns 85%, which is more than 10%. So in that case, they become a beneficial owner of our company A. Now, when we look at Mr. D, we find out that Mr. D is a nominee of Mr. A. And on that basis, Mr. A in aggregate has more than 10% of the issued shares. Just a minute. I was picking a pen. So Mr. A has a relationship with, through Mr. D. If you take the 5% and the 9.9%, even though in the earlier example we had left out Mr. A because of 9.91. In our analysis, you can find out that someone has hidden their true percentages by distributing their shareholders among nominees. So if you find that Mr. D is a nominee of A and A is an existing shareholder with who falls below the required threshold, it is safe to then aggregate those percentages because Mr. D is just a nominee of Mr. A. And on that basis, we end up with Mr. A also being a beneficial owner of this company in this scenario. So in summary, we have used in this instance, Mr. A becoming a beneficial owner out of a nominee arrangement, which is an indirect measure. Mr. B, Mr. C, and Mr. E becoming beneficial owners. Please do note that Mr. E is indirect. Mr. A's from BOF1 should have 9.99 direct and 5% indirect shareholding. So already you are starting to see how the direct and indirect control or ownership or voting rights then come into play. So in this example, we've used the first and the second criteria to identify beneficial owners in this company. Now, I would say that example is still a bit simple. If you have that, your life is not very difficult yet. But our clients can be a little bit more complex than that. Instead of having 2 tires, you could have 3 or 4 or 5 tires. So this is a scenario where we are articulating a 3-tire company. So again, we start at the first tire, the legal shareholders of the company. You go and assess them against the first criteria. And in doing that, we find that Mr. C 45 has 45%, and directly they become beneficial owner. Then we have a joint shareholders, Mr. B and Mrs. BB, who together they hold 30% of the issued shares of the company. Now, in practice, people tend to divide the percentage among the individuals. So for example, if it was 15, people will say it is 7.5, 7.5. But the reality on how to treat this is that either of the joint shareholders can exercise that voting at an AGM. So we attribute the entire joint shareholding to each of them individually without necessarily adding it up or dividing it up. So in our register of beneficial owners, we will enter Mrs. BB as an individual controlling 30%, and we will enter Mr. B also as a beneficial owner, controlling an interest of 30% within the company. Then when we come now to our next company, company B, who has 10%, we ask the same question we asked for our company A. Are there any individuals who meet any of the 4 criteria? Then those people against criteria 1, we find that there's another company. Then we go behind that company again and ask, is there any person who meets any of the 4 set criteria? So at each tier or at each level, you have to apply the 4 criteria to the legal person who was meeting any of the percentages required in that particular case. So when we continue, we find that Mr. F is a beneficial owner of our company indirectly. Now, we could also use criteria 3 and criteria 4. Now, you could get further information that Mrs. D is a founder member of Company B and is a de facto advisor to the board for Company B. So there is an indirect, there is significant control or influence exercised by Mrs. D over Company B. And on that basis, Mrs. D becomes an indirect owner of A. Now, as you continue to evaluate your companies, please remember we ignored Mr. A and we ignored Company C based on percentages. But when we evaluate them against the second, again, we ignore them. When we come to the 3rd and the 4th criteria, you could find additional information. For example, in the case of Mrs. G, you find that they have a right to appoint a director in Company D. And that makes them a beneficial owner in Company D, which then, by extension, they also become an indirect, under criteria 3, they meet the indirect function to appoint or remove directors within the chain of control of the company. Then on assessing further, Mr. H, we find that they are the CFO of the group, and they are responsible single-handedly for the strategic direction of Company A. So they cannot set any strategy unless he signs off. So the board prepares the strategy, they send it to Mr. H. Until Mr. H says proceed, they can't do anything. And any amendments that Mr. H provides are binding to the board of directors of Company A. So on that basis, Mr. H then becomes a beneficial owner of the company, albeit indirectly. So going through that process in each level, you come to the conclusion of who your beneficial owners for the companies are, which is Mr. B, Mrs. Bibi. In this scenario, we've introduced the element of joint shareholding. We've also introduced the element of nominees, nominee shareholding, which brings in the aspect of indirect shareholding. We've used the first criteria, the second criteria, the third criteria, and the fourth criteria. I hope this now does explain a little bit on how to apply the fourth criteria on exercising significant control or influence. Please use the example of Mr. H for the fourth criteria. Another happy scenario for some of our companies, you could go through the process of evaluating your legal shareholders. And as far as the percentage goes and voting rights goes, they all fall below 10%, which means on that basis, they are not beneficial owners. Then you go to the third criteria, none of them single-handedly can appoint a director. You go to the fourth criteria, you find that the board of directors is quite effective in running the affairs of the company, and there is no external influence or anyone who gives them direction on what to do. Now, on that basis, in this Company A, another installment of Company A is no person who meets the required any of the four set criteria. Now, how do you go about this? Now, this, a lot of our management companies or some of the listed companies or generally PE funds, what other type of company falls here? Examples are unlimited. You go to the system, update the BO for everyone. Percentages will be less than 10, voting will be less than 10, right to appoint a director, say none, significant influence, say none, submit. When you do that for everyone, you go to finish, the system will not generate a form BOF1 for you. It will go in, the registry staff will review, they will send it to you with a correction, asking you, the question will be to the effect that you attach a BOF1 or provide a BOF1. Then your response, you do the correction, resubmit again. Before you submit the correction, there is an optional field for making corrections. In that field, please explain the basis on which you are filing a nil return. I've done more than 10 applications on this basis, and they've all been approved by the registry. So it is possible, and the registry do accept that there are companies that have diffused control, that not one single person meets the criteria under the BO regulations. So this addresses your management companies with more than 10 shareholding. Please remember that the first criteria and the second criteria are very important in arriving at this position. Otherwise, it's a bit difficult. Now, if you have a public company, like, for example, Safaricom, being a shareholder, Safaricom itself may not have a natural person behind it that owns more than 10%. So Safaricom itself does not have a beneficial owner. So any interest that then Safaricom holds in other entities, by extension, do not have a reportable beneficial owner. Now, we are having discussions with the registry to enable the system, to enhance the system, to enable you to indicate that fact, so that the system then does not force you to allocate the shares held by that public entity or shareholder. Another example where you may not have a beneficial owner are estates that have not been determined. So there's no confirmation of grant of probate that distributes the estate to enable you establish whether there is any beneficiary who ultimately is entitled to more than 10%, or where the shareholding itself has been disputed and is before a court of law. So we are in discussions for those special scenarios to be included in the workflow, so that you can file a nil return on that basis also. So in this instance, we have no reportable BO. Please note the choice of word. We are not saying there is no BO. We are saying there is no reportable beneficial owner, because in reality, every shareholder has an ultimate beneficial interest in the company. It's only that their interest is insignificant for our purposes. I believe we are halfway, Simon, on the scenarios we are presenting. It would be useful to take any questions relating to what we presented on the identification of the beneficial owners, so that as we go on, there is more clarity on the process.
Just go back to just go back a couple of slides back. So where
This is the first slide.
E, F, G, and H had more. So you need next slide.
This one.
E, F, G, and H, yes.
Yeah.
No, not this one, the previous one. Yeah, so here.
The first slide.
This one. Second.
Okay. I think there is a lapse between what I'm seeing and what you're seeing.
Yes. Oh, yeah, the problem is. So, E, F, G. So here we have said Mr. E becomes a BO. Mr. F, Mr. G, and Mrs. H are not BOs because then their percentage in company B is less than 10%. So that's a question that had been asked by a guest in company B. However, if Mr. E had 80%, Mr. F 10, and Mr. G and Mrs. H 10, then yes, they would be beneficial owners. Malachi, in the case of universities, do sponsors fall under the category of beneficial owners, especially under significant influence and control?
I think you will have to evaluate it in the context of the powers that then the sponsor exercises over the university. After they have sponsored the university, can they make decisions at the exclusion of the Senate or of the governing council, whatever the case is? If yes, then they're BO. But if whatever they want is subject to the Senate's approval, then they can't meet the fourth criterion.
Okay. So in this same scenario, Malachi, a question from Azim Virji, 85% of 10% is less than 10%. Why are we classifying Mr. E as a BO?
So there is a comment I made earlier on that we do not prorate the shares. We apply the criteria to each legal person individually. So we don't check 85% of 10%. No. We do, if the person controls B, then B has the right to control A. Then that person who controls B by extension controls A. In exactly, for example, if Mr. E is appointing all the directors in company B, then those directors are the one giving directions to company A. Then if you go behind the scenes and find out who really issues the instructions, then it is the appointer of those directors, which then would be Mr. E. So we do not prorate the percentages in determining whether one is a beneficial owner or not, where there are layers of legal persons, so to speak.
Okay. Again, Fred Chumo, I guess your question has been answered around prorating. Catherine Fisher is asking, do lenders qualify as BOs? And they will qualify as BOs if, and we are coming to that scenario, if they have, they tick some of those boxes. If you have a debenture holder or a preferential shareholder, then yes, they would qualify as BOs. But we will look at this in the next couple of scenarios, Catherine.
But I would ask under which criteria, because just we'll putting them online.
Of course, you have the 4 criteria. So if I am a lender and by virtue of me lending, then you've given me a preference share, and my preference shareholding then becomes the basis on which I lend, then yes, I would qualify as a beneficial owner. But if I am a bank and I have charged your property, then no, I do not qualify as a beneficial owner. The percentage of ownership is calculated on authorized share capital. Okay, so this question I knew would come up. So when you're doing beneficial ownership at the moment, the system is calculating your your percentage shareholding based on the authorized capital. However, this is not correct, and it should be calculated as a percentage of the issued share capital. I have explained in one of the answers I have given. If you have a company that has 100 shares as authorized capital, and you have only 2 that are issued to Simon Peter, then what you do when you are updating my information as a beneficial owner for total ownership, it will show 2% as direct ownership. So put that in as 2%, whatever the system shows. However, when you move on to the next category, which is voting rights, put 100%, because Simon Peter with the 2 shares controls 100% of the company. Put in 100% and complete your application. Your BOF1 form will therefore come out with total ownership showing as 2%. Don't correct that, don't change that off the system and say it's 100. The system will be updated in due course to factor in only percentages of issued capital. Okay, so I guess that answers the question. If you are registering a new company which has a company as a shareholder, then you need to go into the next tab and select the indirect beneficial owner. When I click the drop down, I can't find the company shareholder, so that I appoint a natural person. So you would, once you have, the problem is in your shareholding. Once you put your shareholding to the private company who's the shareholder, you would need to indicate that they do not hold those shares directly. Once you do that, in the next term, then you will get you'll get the drop down and you'll see the company, and you will be able to appoint a natural person behind it. How do we deal with dead shareholders? Estate, we will look at it shortly. Do you have to meet just one criteria to be a BO? Yes, the criteria for BOs are 4. The misconception around has been that I have to meet all 4 to be declared as a BO. The actual, the law requires you to meet only 1. If you meet only 1 of those criteria, then you qualify to be a BO. University sponsor, what happens if the sponsor is an entity with no shareholders? Again, you need to carry out your due diligence, just investigate, and you would then get to a point where maybe you say no reportable BO, but be sure you can explain yourself as to that. Can we get the recorded webinar? ICS will answer that once we are done, but we will share the information, the presentation that we are projecting, plus other documents. When there's a difference of shareholding percentage on BO, we get errors, and the percentage is yes. So again, your total voting rights need to add up to 100%. Your total shareholding needs to add up to 100%, where the all your shares are issued. So this is what Malachi was saying, that we are speaking to BRS so that people that do not qualify, people who hold less than 10%, we do not need to update the information because they are not reportable. So we do know that there is this challenge in the system, and we can confirm that we have escalated these issues to BRS. Scenario 2, if company B is owned by 3 natural shareholders, and I think scenario 2 is the one that we are looking at, each holding 33%. Do we indicate all the 3 as BOs? The answer is yes. Malachi have done that. So Mrs. E with 85% shareholding in company B, yes, is an indirect BO of our company A by virtue of them being the BO or the controlling person of company B. So you're right, yes, they're indirect. You will then put them behind the shareholding in company A. While appointing B owner, where private companies are majority shareholders, it's unfortunate that the system does not recognize the entity. Okay. I'm not sure what the question there is, but matters of the system, like I said, are being addressed as we go along. Where the BU is a foreign company, how do you add details of the individual? Again, you'll just go to, when you're updating your information, that the total ownership they hold is 10%, the direct ownership is 0%. That then allows you to go down and click add beneficial owner.
I think Simon will address this live, so we can park that.
Okay, so park that. We'll get into the system shortly. The platform currently doesn't allow you to proceed until 100. This I have spoken to. I've spoken to that, and we will also be seeing these scenarios live. So I guess, Malachi, we can carry on with the scenarios. I'm trying to answer as many questions as I can on chat. If I've not answered your question, there's a question from Caroline Thuo around jurisdictions where listed companies are exempt. Malachi, if a company listed on the UK Securities Exchange, which is exempted from filing their BO information, has a stake in a local company, how do you go about that?
I think the issue here is the fact that you are exempt in UK. If the law in Kenya requires you to provide that information for which you are exempt in UK, you have to comply with Kenyan law. So it is immaterial whether in your country of registration you are exempted on this or not. So my take will be, because you are required in Kenya, they have to collect that information and provide it to us for purposes of compliance in Kenya.
Okay, I think we can carry on with the scenarios, Malachi.
Thank you. And I am seeing Mr. Azim is not agreeing with my earlier response. So the take is, we are not here setting in stone how this thing is. We are sharing our experience based on how we are doing it and based on the discussions we've had with the registrar on the expectations. So please feel free to disagree with us, and then do also share with us on what basis the disagreement is arising. So please, if we've shared a certain scenario in a manner that you are of the opinion, you have a contrary opinion, please do feel free to share with us, and we will pursue it further. Having said that, moving on to the next scenario. This we've done. So this is scenario number 5. So the next scenario is where the shareholder is a limited partnership. Please note that we've simplified this to address the specific type of legal person. Now, you could have this among other shareholders similar to what we had here. But for ease of discussion, we are reducing this to that legal person alone. So where a limited partnership is a shareholder in your company, you need to first check the percentage that the limited partnership has in your company. If that percentage is above 10%, then you need to apply the 4 set criteria on the limited partnership against the partners. The first criteria, is there any partner that has at least 10% stake, or at least 10% stake is attributable to that partner? And you can determine this using the partnership deed. If there is a general partner and limited partners, and the limited partners are not equity partners, then the general partner themselves becomes the beneficial owner. However, if you have any limited partner who has more than 10% equity in the partnership, then that partner also will become a beneficial owner. So for purposes of limited partnerships, the document of interest for your review is the partnership deed. And what we are addressing is the stake attributable to each of the partners. Now, please do note that the general partner, depending on some of the rights that are vesting on them in the deed, they may also, in addition to their stake in the company, qualify as a beneficial owner, especially under the third and the fourth criteria. So for an LP, the takeaways is that there is issues of indirect control to be looked at, issues of direct control by the general partner or partners, and also indirect significant influence. The next type of legal person is a limited liability partnership. And we are looking at this from 2 points of view, where the limited partnership is owned by individuals or where there is corporate partnership also being introduced in the LLP. So the first, in the first instance and at tier 1, please keep in mind, this LLP could be shareholders among other shareholders. But for purposes of this discussion, again, we are taking their percentage to qualify them for further obtaining of information. And then we again look at the partnership deed to establish the equity stake by each of the partners. Now, by looking at that alone, we identify Mr. B, who has a 15% stake as a beneficial owner. Now, the company B has an 80% stake. So again, we apply the 4 criteria on company B. And then we find that company B has individuals who meet this criteria. Mr. D with 58% is above the 10%. So they are a beneficial owner of company B. And by extension, they are beneficial owners of company A, which is a subsidiary or a related entity of company B. Mr. E also meets our threshold, and the rest of the shareholders at tier 3 level do not. So in conclusion, in filing the beneficial ownership information for the LLP, they are all indirect. We will capture Mr. B, we will capture Mr. D and Mr. E as the beneficial owners in company A. And the relationship is through the LLP. Now, moving on to a registered trust as a legal entity, we are only addressing a legal trust because only a registered, we are addressing a registered trust because only the registered trust can hold shares in its own name. Where the trustees are holding shares as joint shareholders, we have addressed this in our earlier scenarios. Please apply that for purposes of identifying the persons together with the powers that they exercise over the company. Now, for a registered trust, depending on the powers, the residual powers in the trust deed, the settler could be identified as a beneficial owner together with the protector. Now, they may not have an ultimate beneficial interest as far as the stake goes, but the powers that they have can qualify them under criteria 3 or criteria 4 as beneficial owners. Again, looking at the trustees together with the rights that are ascribed to them individually, if there is a trustee that meets in either the 3rd or the 4th criteria, then they would become a beneficial owner. Then when you get to the beneficiaries under the registered trust, you have to evaluate their individual stake within the shares of company A. Usually there is a distribution list where Mr. A could get company A, Ms. B could get another different company, or the shares in one company could be distributed among all the beneficiaries. So so when we are looking at company A, we only assess the beneficiaries to the extent that shares in company A, they are entitled to shares in company A, so to speak. So in this case, we find that Ms. B is entitled to 58% of the shares in company A. Mrs. C is entitled, and on that basis, they become a shareholder. Now, going back to the argument that was posed by Mr. Azim, for limited companies, we do not attribute the ultimate prorated percentage, but we give beneficiaries a different treatment because if, for example, Mrs. D is a beneficiary under this trust, but they are not entitled to any shares in company A, it will not be correct to say that they have ultimate beneficial interest in this company. So it's only in trust arrangements where the prorating of the interest or looking at the exact interest that this beneficiary has then would make sense in that case. So in evaluating a registered trust, the protector, the settler, and the trustees, subject to the trust deed, would become beneficial owners, whereas as far as the beneficiaries goes, Ms. B and Mrs. C are BOs of our company A. Another example of a type of shareholder you could have is an estate of a deceased shareholder. Please do note that you can only identify beneficial owners in estates that have been determined. And the underlying document we are going to use or to review is the schedule in the confirmation of grant of probate, which you should have in your possession. Now, in that confirmation of grant of probate, the executors or the executrix becomes the beneficial owner because under criteria 3 and 4, and then for the beneficiaries, to the extent that the shares of company A are distributable to them, they then become beneficial owners if those shares are more than 10%. So in this case, all the executors or executrixes, Miss B and Mrs. C, are beneficial owners of the company. Now, please do note that where there is no confirmation of grant, the BO of this estate cannot be identified, and Regulation 11A then applies. You can enter one of the statements under Regulation 11A in your register that we do believe that there is a beneficial owner behind this estate, but for some reason, we cannot identify them at the moment. The other scenario we could have, please do recall, we gave you this example to apply to management companies, but there could be other factors that could lead to people who we had ignored based on their percentages, then end up being beneficial owners. And in this installment, we are discussing the issue of voting rights. So in this example, this company has ordinary A shares and ordinary B shares. In assessing the articles of the shareholders agreement, you have established that ordinary shares, ordinary A shares, for every one share they hold, there are 2 voting rights. So in terms of voting, even though percentage ownership is the same and it's below 10%, if we recalculate voting rights for those who are holding A shares, you realize that they have more than 10% voting rights. And on that basis, we identify Mr. A, Mr. B, Mr. C, and Mr. D as beneficial owners of the company. And the applicable criteria is criteria 2, more than 10% voting rights, in this case, directly. So recalculating percentages for voting, you realize they each control 11.76% of the voting rights in the company. Again, using the voting criteria, because percentage shareholding is straight. Either you are holding shares or not. You are either holding them yourself or holding them through a nominee. And we had looked at that example earlier on. So in voting rights, there is what now we call voting block arrangement that shareholders can enter into, so that where there are certain matters of interest to that class of shareholders, then they vote as a block. If that is the case, and you've cited that document, then the number of members, the aggregate sum of the voting rights of the individuals will be attributed to each of the members of each of the signatories to that voting block arrangements. So when we take all the percentages in terms of shares are the same, the voting rights attributable to the individuals are the same. There is no shareholder with the right to appoint or remove a director. There's no third party qualifying under criteria 4, but there is a voting block signed between Mr. I, Mr. J, Mr. K, and Mr. L. Now, we identify the 4 individuals as beneficial owners, and the interest that they control is the sum total of the votes that they can each exercise in the company. So in this case, we do indicate them as indirectly controlling 30.80 voting rights in the company. Now, this feature itself, as we are explaining it today, has not been enabled in the system, in the BRS workflow as it is now. So you are then not able to attribute more percentage, more than 100% of the shares. If you were to add this up, it will be more than 100%. So there should be a feature in the system to allow recognition of voting block arrangements, if any, in the company. Now, there was a question relating to why we are saying percentage shareholding could be different with voting rights, and why we need to independently apply the 2 scenarios. The next 2 examples of scenarios is going to clarify that. Instances where you have a higher stake but less voting, or less voting but a higher stake. Now, these occur mostly in scenarios where a company has both different classes of shares. In our example, we are taking ordinary shares and preference shares. Now, in this example, all ordinary shares rank equally in all rights, and all preference shares have voting rights. So in computing percentage shareholding, we add ordinary shares to preference shares and take that as a percentage out of the nominal capital. Now, if we do that, we'll get 7.1%, 7.16, 35, 49, and 0.002 for Mr. E. Now, applying criteria 1 alone in terms of percentage ownership, we then get to identify Mr. C, Mr. D as beneficial owners on the basis that they own more than 10% of the issued shares of the company. Please keep in mind that this is direct shareholding first criteria. And I would want to draw your attention to the fact that we have ignored Mr. E in this case. My slides are acting up.
This is the second scenario.
So in the second scenario, exactly the same shareholding, with a difference that now the preference shares do not have voting rights. Now, when we work out the percentage shareholding using the first criteria, the result is still the same with the earlier example, where we are going to identify Mr. C, we are going to identify Mr. D, and we are identifying Mr. E as a beneficial owner. So the earlier example left us at this stage where it was only Mr. C and Mr. D who are the beneficial owners. However, because now preference shares do not have voting rights, we disregard all preference shares when we determine percentages in voting rights. And we find that Mr. A still falls below 10%, Mr. B falls below 10%, Mr. C is 31%, Mr. D is 32%, and Mr. E controls 20% of the ordinary shares, but they have no preference shares, so to speak. So their percentage voting in the company is 20. And on this basis, we now identify Mr. E as a beneficial owner. So the takeaway from this is that you could go through the first criteria and someone does not meet the threshold, but when you go through the second, the third, and the fourth, you could have the same person now meeting the threshold for beneficial ownership. So there should be diligence in going through all the criteria for everyone who did not meet the first or the second criteria, so to speak. So in the first example, we ignored Mr. B when we looked at percentage shareholding, but when we come to voting, now they are a beneficial owner. So that is the example where you find that percentage shareholding is not the same as percentage voting. So that answers the earlier question. Now, there was a question on NGO, and we will bundle that with companies limited by guarantee because consideration is the same. NGOs and CLGs may not have percentage shares or percentage shareholding to be calculated because they have membership. However, they do have voting rights at their general meetings. The right to appoint or remove a director could be vested on someone, or there could be someone who meets criteria number 4. So for companies that don't have shares, we apply the second, the third, and the fourth criteria in identifying any beneficial owners within that legal person. And that also applies to foundations registered elsewhere. Now that brings us to the end of the scenarios. I am seeing the number of questions are now at 4. Simon, any issue on identification we would want to clarify now before we proceed to the registers?
So Francis Kakai is asking whether based on criteria 4 on significant influence, the CEO and CFO who determine the strategic direction of the company, but they're not shareholders, would be considered as a reportable PO.
You want to provide the response?
I was throwing that to you.
Okay. The short of it is, does the CEO or the CFO prepare this document and then it is final? or do they subject it to a board approval process? If the latter is the case, then they are not the ultimate person who prepares, authorizes, and approves that document. And then because the responsibility lies with the board, which is a collective, that by itself then does not make the CEO or the CFO a beneficial owner, because they are working under someone. They are not the last person in that process.
Okay. Interesting questions about a provident or a pension fund. And I guess this also speaks to employee share ownership plans and schemes, where there is a nominee who holds shares on behalf of such, who do you declare as the beneficial owner?
So how many people would you capture under criteria 1 and 2 in a pension fund in a company?
Yeah. In most of them, there would be no one you can capture in that criteria.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Similar to listed companies, we worry about the large number without applying the minimum threshold set in the regulations. The moment, I don't think you can have someone in a pension fund owning above 10%, 10% and above. Highly unlikely. But if you do, then it's only that person or two people who then are the beneficial owners for that purpose.
Okay, so for a public listed company or a foreign company that owns more than 10%, then you need to go behind, and this is a question from Stephen, how do you report the bills for such? You would need to go behind the public listed company or the foreign company and confirm whether there is anyone that meets the 4 criteria. If there is someone who holds more than 10% and of the ownership in that listed company or in that foreign company, there is someone who has more than 10% voting rights, there is someone who can appoint directors in that entity or remove the director, and there is someone in that company who exercises significant control, then that is the kind of person you would be reporting as the BO for the public company. However, as we have said, you could have instances where there is no one in those companies that exercises any of the 4 rights, and therefore you would then, have no reportable BO, and Malachi has spoken to that. We've answered the question of the nominee and the pension fund and the ESOP. So in the last scenario, Mr. E with 20% shareholding will not be recognized as a BO if their voting rights are less than 10%. So this is the scenario, Malachi, we were discussing. The second last scenario we discussed, where Mr. E had 20% of the ordinary shares. Again, the question, CS Peter Njuki, is what constitutes percentage shareholding? Both preference shareholding and ordinary shareholding should be considered. So I might have 10% of the ordinary shareholding, but have less than 10 of the total shareholding. So therefore, if I have 10% of the ordinary, I qualify, but you have to go back and see, do I actually own 10% of the total issued capital of the company? If the answer is no, then I do not qualify as a BO. So therefore, it's not just about voting rights, it's about ownership and then voting rights. Remember, if you qualify under ownership and you do not qualify under voting rights, you are still a reportable BO. I hope that makes sense. So if I hold 10% shareholding in my own stead as a shareholder, and for some reason I have devolved my voting rights to 2 other people, and therefore I can only exercise 5% voting rights, I am a BO by virtue of the fact that I exercise 10% shareholding. Okay. Malaka is answering that. What happens when a SACCO owns 100% of the shares in a company? So you need to go back to the SACCO, like Malachi has said. Are you able to identify any one shareholder or any one member of the SACCO who controls more than 10%? If no, then
of the capital.
Yeah, of the capital of the SACCO. If no, then there's no point. You can't disclose. There's no reportable BO. If the CEO and CFO are not the final decision makers, then you should list the whole board as BOs under criteria 4. Exercising significant control. That opens up a debate on whether the whole board. Again, it would be a question of or in my opinion, it would be a question of what's the size of your board. And if you have a board of 13.
But really, Simon, the question here is, are you saying that each of the directors individually makes decisions single-handedly?
Exactly.
Or do each of them have a vote? Do each of them have a vote and each of them can be outvoted in anything, which means they really don't have that right to pass that decision, whether it is criteria 3 or criteria 4. What people should note, what members should note, is that the board of directors act as a collective, not as individuals. So because it is a collective, you cannot attribute the powers of the board to the individual members. The two should be separated. The members are separate from the collective. And what we are interested are individual members of the board who meets either 1, 2, 3, or 4th criteria. So in response to Eunice, no, you should not just list the board members as BOs on the basis that they are the board members alone. You have to apply the 4 criteria to each director and establish whether they single-handedly meet any of those 4 set criteria before you list any of them as a beneficial owner.
Okay. Phyllis, I guess your question has been answered around who are the beneficial owners for a nominee company. Therefore, if you have a nominee company, you then need to get the document showing that nominee arrangement and disclose the rightful people. For example, 5,000 shares, only 2 of which are issued. Again, yeah, I think Malachi?
So for this case, the system will calculate some insignificant percentage under ownership, but we do know that in terms of true ownership, these 2 shares are the 100%. So you use the 2, if it's 1 shareholder, then they are 100%. If there are 2 shareholders, then they are 50-50. So when you go to voting, you put 50%, the system will recognize that as above the minimum, and you will be required to appoint a beneficial owner for that person, for that company. Now, if it's nominee, then you will need to put the beneficiaries for behind the nominee company as indirect shareholders. There's a question on dead shareholders. In our presentation, this is the estate of the late shareholder. So please apply that scenario in answering this, and they are all indirect. You can't have beneficial owners relating to an estate as direct shareholders. So
Azim asks a good question on the issue of registering directors as beneficial owners. Instances where the chairman has a casting vote. So this is what I was saying about the numbers. If you have if you have 5 or 10 directors, then the casting vote for the chairman doesn't make sense. If you have 2 directors and one of whom has a casting vote, then that automatically gives them significant influence. So again, it has to be
and Simon, really the question here is the casting vote standing alone or in context with the other votes? Would you say the single vote by the chairman is enough to pass decisions in a board where there's a casting vote? So you put it in context and you realize that for the chairman's vote for or against a resolution, half of the directors must be sitting on both sides already, so that whichever side the chairman goes with their vote is the majority side. And that majority vote cannot be attributed to the chairman as a person. It then becomes the decision of the board of directors for that company. So to attribute it to the chairman and say that then that makes the chairman a beneficial owner, in my view, would not be entirely correct.
Okay. There have been a lot of questions around why it's taking so long to process information at BRS. I think it is important for CS Malachi and CS Simon Peter here to state that we do not work for the registry and we do not speak for the registry. We give feedback based on our interaction with the registry. So now there's a question why these workflows are taking long to be reviewed. And the explanation was given by Malachi earlier. Before the 31st January deadline, before there was a huge influx of these applications, you could apply for your beneficial information today, and 2 days later, that information is processed. We got to a point where there were quite a number, and it took 2 weeks. Since the deadline, there were so many applications on the queue. Right about, Malachi, correct me if I'm wrong, at one point we had 60,000 applications for BO in the queue. That therefore goes without saying that in line with the kind of capacities that are there at the registry, there will be inadvertent delays. However, as we have explained, the BRS is in the process of increasing and improving capacities. That being, information or training for the current members at BRS, the current staff, and even recruitment of new staff. So that is going on. So you should expect delays at the moment, but it is something that is being addressed. I hope that is clear, really.
I'm not sure how we are doing time-wise, Simon. We should be having a break at some point.
Yeah.
Are we still okay on time?
I think we're doing okay. We can have a short break once we have answered Bernadette Nyambura on one golden share that decides appointment. Again, this you would find in constitutive documents or documents that affect or that deal with the relationship of shareholders. So where you have one golden share that decides appointment, then yes, that will be a beneficial owner. I think we can take an 8-minute health break.
10 minutes, you said?
8 minutes. We'll be back at 11 so that we can finalize and conclude this.
Just for the record, we've answered about 110 questions from members. So hopefully, as we go along, if any member feels their questions have not been answered properly, the recording of this presentation will be shared with all the attendees. So you need not worry if you've not seen any particular response. But I'm not sure if we will be repeating ourselves. Once we've given the response, the recording will be made available to you. So 8 minutes from now. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
we can come back at 11.
Hi, are we back? Can you start? Kiprono, Simon? Can we proceed, Kiprono?
I'm here, Malachi.
Okay. There's a question from Emily Onyango. Kiprono, you can give them sound. I think we can take a few questions, then we proceed with the next section of this presentation on the register of beneficial owners, the actual register itself.
Okay, if you would like to ask a question, just raise your hand and I'll give you rights to speak. Yes, Sada, just unmute yourself and say something.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I just wanted to ask that the beneficial owner had been done, and it has been uploaded on eCitizen, but the director, one of the director shareholder, has now resigned. So what would be and the BO is still under review. So what would be the procedure? Do you still need to go and amend the BO register, or what happens?
So just clarify, this director shareholder, have they resigned as a director or they've also transferred their shares?
They've transferred their shares, resigned and transferred their shares.
So the chronology of events, you'll have to wait for the BO application to be approved, then you start processing the transfer of shares, which will require you to file the cessation of the BO transfer of shares.
That has already been done. The process is done. He's done with the process. So now, but you see the BO register was still under review. So does it mean you need to go back and amend, or what happens? Do you do a new BO register and upload it?
So I think keep this question. We are going to address the issue of registers in the next part of this presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so there's a question.
I don't see any other hands.
Yeah, I think we finish Malachi with the presentation, and then we go on to the system and we also project the issues we had gotten.
Okay. So all companies are required to prepare a register of beneficial owners and file this with the registrar of companies within 30 days of its preparation. What we wanted to reiterate here is that the register that the company needs to prepare is not from BOF1. There should be a register of beneficial owners, and the company should take reasonable steps to ensure that the register of beneficial owners is prepared in good time and kept up to date. Any changes in the register of beneficial owners should be filed with the registrar of companies within 14 days of that change happening. Now, there is an exemption on the 14 days period for listed companies. So when you read Section 93A, it exempts public companies from making the change in beneficial owners within 14 days. My personal view on this is that this exemption came in without considering the issue of the threshold of 10%, because I'm not sure whether a practitioner can confirm, but shareholders with more than 10% shareholding in listed companies rarely transfer their shares. So it's not a day-to-day transaction, as it's not a transaction that happens on the counter every day to warrant an exemption. So with time, you might see this exemption falling off because it serves no purpose as far as the compliance process goes. The reasonable steps that the company should take include giving a general notice to all the qualifying shareholders to be complied with within 21 days of its issuance. Please note, it is your work as the CS or the work of the board to identify people in the register that qualify as beneficial owners and then send general notices seeking confirmations and further details for them to be recorded as beneficial owners. So if you have a listed company, there's no requirement for you to send this to all the 2,000 or 10,000 shareholders. If a general notice is not complied with, you send a warning notice, which need to be supported by a board resolution, and the notice period is 14 days. If the warning notice is not complied with, then you send a restriction notice, which also needs to be supported by a board resolution. If the restriction notice, if the warning notice, if you put a restriction notice on a particular shareholder and then they provide the information, you need to issue a withdrawal notice, which also needs to be supported by a board resolution. Now, templates of these resolutions have been provided in the guide, which we mentioned earlier on. So when you get the guide, please peruse through. You will see templates that you can adopt for your own purposes. Sample notices are mentioned. The board resolution should vary depending on the specific circumstances of the company. So we didn't even bother to come up with a template board resolution because the circumstances will vary even within one company. The circumstances of the beneficial owners not responding or the types of shareholders would vary widely. So you will use your best judgment on how that board resolution will look like. The register of beneficial owners, we did take the liberty to prepare a template, which we will share with you. I'm putting it on my screen now. So basically, we call it a register of beneficial owners. We've styled this to the register of members, but information is different. So it has a cover page. Then on the first leaf of the register, the entries will be for individuals. So you have an entry number, more like a folio number. Then you put the link of the beneficial owner with the company. Can you see my screen? Simon?
Yes, Malaka.
So the link of the beneficial owner with the company, here you will put the name of the company or the individual for whom the beneficial owner is being attached to. Then the full name of the beneficial owner, some personal details to include date of birth, nationality, ID number, KRA PIN where applicable, and occupation. Address of the BO, we have electronic address, postal address, and residential address. Then the next segment is the nature of ownership. You have to indicate under the 4 criteria, what is it that this beneficial owner has met, whether it is direct or indirect. Then the reasonable steps you have taken, if a warning notice was sent, which date it was sent, if a restriction notice has been issued, which date it was issued, and if a withdrawal notice has been issued, the dates that they had been issued. Then you also need to indicate the source of the information, which we had indicated earlier on, that you have 3 options. You have to select from what source you got the information. Then there's the date of becoming a beneficial owner, which should not be earlier than 21st of February. Then whereas a person assists being a beneficial owner, you file, you indicate in the register the date of cessation. So the earlier question relating from SADA is that once you have updated this and you've now inserted the date of cessation, then you need to go online and generate Form BOF 3. Sign that and file that with the Register of Companies. So in the first instance, you need to prepare this register. Within 30 days of its preparation, then file Form BOF 1. Within 14 days of any information changing in this register, you need to file Form BOF 2 or Form BOF 3, depending on the nature of that change, within 14 days of that change. So I do hope that that clarifies the issue on the register, the maintenance of the actual register at the company level. And with those few remarks, we want to promise you that we will share this template register in the folder we will share for your consideration and adoption, if you deem it sufficient for your purposes. So this register is designed to be used as an electronic register. If you want more information, please get in touch with us. Now you have the register. You've prepared it, it's ready, it's sitting in the company, you printed a few copies, you have them. Who can you share that information with? Now, on the company side, the register of beneficial owners particulars should only be accessed by the officers of the company. The officers being individual directors and the company secretary. Those are the officers of the company recognized under the Companies Act. There are discussions with the Registrar of Companies to restrict the access of this information also in the backend. And indeed, we've received confirmation that very few staff members have the clearance to see this information we file from the registrar's backend. So the information is restricted to such an extent that the public should not get a copy of it, even inadvertently. There are penalties for disclosure of this information. Competent authorities can make written applications to the Register of Companies and not to the company. So if you receive a letter from NIS or CID requesting you to disclose BO information, please do not. Redirect them to the Register of Companies, because there is no provision for the competent authorities to obtain this information from the company. They get it from the Register of Companies upon a written application. So don't receive calls, emails, WhatsApp messages from CID or from whichever authority telling you should take this information to them. And that brings us to the end of the presentation. We did promise we will take you briefly through the online portal to show you a thing or two. I will share my screen now.
Yeah, so as Malaka is doing that, as Malaka is doing that, I think I need to just address a couple of questions. Does the BO register also have the deadline of 31st July 2021? The BO register is similar to the register of directors. You are not, you are under no compulsion to prepare it, personally, but the Act does require that you maintain the register. So it is advisable that you have with you. So have the register, prepare the register, and you will be able to be in compliance. The same way no one really checks whether you maintain the register of directors, secretaries, and shareholders does not mean that you're not supposed to maintain that register. So it's a requirement of the Act for you to maintain the register. Are you required to file this register with the Register of Companies? No. this register is for use by the company. And as Malachi has indicated, it is not for use for public consumption. There is a fine for disclosing of this information. Like we said when we started, this information is private, it's confidential. And even at BRS, the number of people that have access to this information is restricted. And on that note, I think it's good that I recognize that in our midst this morning are representatives, not one or two, but a couple representatives of the BRS who are going through this presentation and going through this webinar with us. They have, I have received confirmation that we have a few of them on the line. And so therefore you can be sure that the information and the issues that we are highlighting and raising will be addressed. They have also registered for this, and they will be getting all these questions and the responses that we have given so far. So you can rest assured that we have the blessing of BRS in the responses, that some of the responses that we are giving. How do you account for state corporations under the BO registration? I think this is a discussion that is still ongoing, and not just state corporations in Kenya, but even those outside Kenya. So I've had instances of when you do your due diligence, you find that the ultimate shareholder is China, or it's the UK government. Do you go ahead to register the Prime Minister? Do you go ahead to register the Queen? These discussions that are currently the registry will be offering guidance on this as we go on. There are some queries that, like for example, Ruth Njeri's, the best forum to address your issue around directors and shareholders that cannot be traced is through the Joint Liaison Committee. So please shelf that. You can write to us and we'll let you know how you get into the JLC. Will the presentation be shared? Yes, the presentation will be shared. Why is the date of becoming BO not earlier than 21st February? This Malachi explained that the regulations were gazetted on the 21st of February, and that's when the law became applicable. So you then only became a BO because the law cannot be applied prospectively. Then you became a BO with effect 1st February. So the BOF1 is denoted as the register of beneficial owners. Is it relevant? Again, you know, we have silent, good question, but we have said the BOF1 is not the register you maintain. In the same way you maintain the list of directors and shareholders in your annual return, but you still maintain a separate register of directors and shareholders, that's the same spirit of the law that was envisaged under this regime of beneficial ownership. Does this apply to the preparation of the register or the actual filing? The deadline of 31st applies to the filing. I think we've said that quite a couple of times. Please use my details. I think you have the details you've used to register are the ones that you will get. Clarify on how you file BOF1 for management companies, where each shareholder. This we have seen. So when you get our presentation, look at scenario number 4. There will be no reportable BO. I have updated BO for my company, which is still under review, but I want to retrieve the BO I uploaded, but in documents part I can't see it. Again, this could be because of the nature of the privacy and confidentiality of that information, and advise you wait for this to be reviewed. Then if you're a director, shareholder, or secretary, you'd be able to see that information. I think we can go into the system. Grace Muriagoro, I'm not sure what your question relates to. in terms of visiting the registry. I'm not sure what that relates to. Ruth, Jerry, I'll share with you a link to join the Joint Liaison Committee group. Okay, Malachi, back to you. We can look at the practical, how to access and work through the system.
Before we go there, I have a special appeal to make to all these members who are attending this meeting right now. We have a feedback that we are planning to share with the registrar after this. We looked at the current beneficial owners workflow as it has been designed, and we picked out outstanding issues that in our view need to be addressed for the direct BO. You can see my screen?
Yes.
So we've synthesized what needs to be done for direct BO, for indirect BO, which is an individual, indirect BO, which is a local company, and indirect BO, which is a foreign company, and other types of legal persons. And we've also addressed the issue of where there is no reportable beneficial owner, for example, in management companies, PE funds, state-owned enterprises, sovereign funds, listed companies, etc. These are some of the issues we've picked up, and we're also giving you the opportunity to give us any other further suggestions you have on this. So we shared this through WhatsApp earlier on and through email, but I do reckon that there are people who may or may not have seen this. So I am posting under chat the link that can take you to this form. Currently, we have 41 responses, but at least if we could get 100 or 150 responses, we can have a basis on which we can tell the registrar this number of practitioners have gone through the new enhancements we are requesting. Please look into it.
Okay.
Actually hold a lot of sway. So please put the link. It will take you about less than 5 minutes to read through. Leave your name and your email address. Now, if you endorse or you have no further comments, you agree with what has been provided, just type the word nil or endorse or agree, whichever your preference, and then submit. Then your voice would have been added to the voice of the 41 who have done this. So please, before the end of this call, take a moment, copy, open the link. You can complete it even immediately after this meeting. It will go a long way. That is a special appeal to those who are here. Please lend your voice to us in this respect.
Thank you.
Now,
And some of those issues are the same issues we are raising here in this question. So please,
yeah,
don't grow tired of writing these issues. There's a question from Duncan Masharia. Do you need to file BO for shareholders with less than 10%? No, you don't. But you might need to just update the information and show that they file, they have, we're coming to that shortly in the system to show you how to proceed when the system tells you you need to get 100% shareholding.
okay.
Yes, Karaoke was referring to the question on filing BO with joint holders. So for BOs with joint holders, I've not seen any instance, and BRS is not accepting filing of documents manually for BO information. Therefore, you would need to get in touch with BRS to have your information loaded for the joint shareholding. But we can take this offline after this. Again, I'll share a link where you can join and ask your question on that in that link. Again, the issues of delays at BRS, I think we have addressed. Simon Diku, we have addressed those issues. Can BRS give access to the company secretary or the directors? That should be done. How does one account for shares forfeited or held in lien? Those ones then would be factored in as unissued shares, and thus do not qualify when we are talking about beneficial ownership information. Wakili Kututa, thank you for your email. And now I think I can pose the questions there so that we then go to the system.
So I'm assuming everyone here has interacted with the system to some extent so that you know how to maintain and get to the page where you need to update your beneficial owners. So we have an example of a company. So I'm using, I requested and I was granted access to the test server. So this is not a live, it's not anyone's company. So this is only for discussion purposes. So for all purpose and intent, you might see a few things different from what you saw last time. So that would explain the differences. So after you've logged into your company and you want to update the beneficial owners, you click the link Update BO. What this then does, it takes you to the page where you allocate the beneficial owner interest for that particular shareholder. Now, the system calculates for you a percentage which you cannot change, but in the right side, it gives you an option to say what of that percentage this client owns, this shareholder holds directly or indirectly. So for the direct, if I say here under direct it is 0, then it means the entire 40% is held indirectly. And now, when I go to voting rights, it still gives me the percentage that this holds. But in the event that the percentage is different, for example, in the scenarios we were looking at ordinary different classes of shares, then this could be even higher or much lower. But again, in this case, if I say 0, then it means all these are held indirectly. Then you have to choose whether they have control or whether they have a right. Now, even if all this was 0, but I select here direct or indirect, it would make this person a beneficial owner. So please be cautious when you select the type of control and type of right to appoint a director, because by saying direct or indirect, it then requires you to add additional details for this person, because automatically they've met one of the 4 criteria and they become a shareholder. Then you put the date, they've become a BO. Then you put the date for existing companies at the commencement of the regulations. We did indicate it is 21st of February. Then the system allows you, so this is not in the system for now. The next option is for you to then choose where you got your information. Then you click save. So I told you I'm using the test server, so that one you will not see. So for this person, I've already captured them as a person who has indirect shareholding. Then when I go to a company, this test company I've set up, it will give you the total percentage and will ask you what is being held directly. So if I say, so the total voting rights for this company will be 60, but please do keep in mind that companies can only hold all their shares indirectly. So you put, if the system calculates for you a percentage and it gives you the option to give the direct, the response is always 0. Then you say none unless you've seen a document saying that they can appoint someone, then you submit your information. So in this example, this is the tab that was not there for the other example. You have to select the source of your information, whether you got it from the beneficial owner themselves or the authorized person, taken from register or provided by a third party. The default so far would be the first choice for a lot of our beneficial owners. Then you submit. Now, because I have indirect shareholders, the next step is to scroll down to the appointment button and click appointment. It will open this, and then under designation, select beneficial owner, and then you'll put the ID type depending on who is. So one of the missing gaps here is that the minor ID type is missing. So you currently you cannot disclose a minor as a beneficial owner. But that's one of the comments one of you should be sending on the Google form. So for ease of reference, I'll use foreigner. Use do the necessary. You put all the dates, the information you require. So after you put all this information, the most interesting bit where you need to pay a lot of attention, if you say this person has direct or indirect, again, they become a beneficial owner on that basis. So you need to reconfirm this information. Now, where you allocate indirect shares is here. So you click add, then it gives you a drop down where you select the person for whom this person is a beneficial owner. So when you select John Doe, remember John Doe was holding 40%, but we indicated that all this 40% was indirect. So we come here and we allocate the 40% to this person. And then we can also add where the same BO is a BO to all the, is everyone else is a nominee for them. Then we come here and you allocate. Now, this will vary depending to your circumstances. So the allocation really is determined by what you found out. So for this purpose, we'll put both. So you allocate both percentage shareholding and percentage voting. Then you indicate the date, effective date, and where you got this information from, and you submit. Now, since I last added these details, the system has been upgraded in the test server. So it can't allow me to add this foreign company as a local company, but that's something for another day. So basically I've taken you through the motions of adding a beneficial owner. So once the information is completely covered, captured, when you come to the end, you are then able to enter, submit this, generate the form BOF1, and sign it off and sign, upload. There's no payment and submit. Then it goes to review. And if in any case, if there is a correction, it comes back to you. You are then able to address that. If it was a nil return under the correction, give them the reason why you think yours should be a nil return. Now, when you go into the system, you could find some very small fractional percentages being shown, or 0.00, because it's been rounded off. And on that basis, if you try putting 0.00, the system rejects. If you put another number, the system rejects. We have raised this, and indeed, you should also raise it in addition if you have that issue in the Google form, and we will follow up for the registry to address that issue in the next round of development. Also, if you go through the Google forms, there are those companies that do not have someone behind them, but in our company, they have more than 10%. The system demands that we give a beneficial owner. We've requested for a function to, if I can take you through that, we've requested for a feature for us to click to indicate that there is no beneficial owners. And those are the requests we have under indirect BOs, local company and indirect BOs, foreign companies. And of course, the next segment on where there is no beneficial owner. So we are requesting that they add a feature with the statement, there is no individual who meets the set criteria under the BO regulations. And on that basis alone, the BO F1 will then not be generated, and you are able to submit your application as a nil return. So for those people who are having challenges, especially on the percentages and how to identify, how to allocate indirect shares, please go through this list. It's quite comprehensive. I'm seeing 4 people, a number of people have already completed the form since we shared the link, and leave your issue there. It's a guarantee that the more voices we have on these issues, the easier the engagement with the registrar will be, seeing the numbers that have given the feedback on those issues. If you do not have any addition, please still go in and endorse this position. So you add your number, your endorsement to the number of people who are submitting this representation to the registrar.
I think,
yeah.
At this point, if you could go back to the system, there are a couple of questions that have been asked around why in the tab for adding a beneficial owner, am I not seeing the drop down for the shareholding? So if in company A, in our company here, John Doe holds the 40% in trust for myself. If I do, just click the edit button. Yeah. So if I indicate that John Trump Doe owns these shares directly, if I put the 40% there, then John Doe becomes the BO. If I put 40% under total voting, John Doe becomes the BO. So therefore, in the next tab, when I'm trying to appoint the BO, this information, you will not be able to find John Doe in the dropdown. It's important as you do this to ensure that if John Doe does not hold these shares for their own behalf or on their own behalf and they hold it for someone else, that this bit here, the direct ownership and the direct voting rights, you indicate as 0. That makes it possible for you to be able to get the John Doe drop down. If you indicate that percentage, that if this is 40% and the direct ownership is 20%, then you're saying that there is a 20% that is not owned by John Doe. So therefore, when you go to the drop down, you will only be able to top up or to feed in another beneficial owner who will be able to get the remaining 20%. So it's important really to be very careful about this bit here. Yeah, so be clear that if you put a direct ownership, then there will be no indirect ownership. If you put indirect ownership, then you have to appoint a BO. Okay.
There are some hands on this. I don't know if they're still up or we've addressed their concerns.
Gabriel Waweru, I've allowed you to speak. Just unmute yourself and ask your question, then go back to mute. Gabriel? Okay, his hand was probably up as an error. If you have any questions, you can put up your hand.
This is a happy scenario. I'm no longer receiving emails on beneficial ownership information. This is good. There's a Malachi Adede with a question.
Malachi, unmute yourself and ask your question. Then Anne Mureithi, and you'd unmute yourself next and ask a question.
So this Malachi is someone who has used my link. So please,
Yes,
if it is.
Yes, I was asking.
Please introduce yourself, then ask your question.
Yes. My name is Ahmed Mpapa from Kimani Mwangi Advocates.
Okay, Ahmed. Please go ahead.
Yes, I was requesting, you had indicated you will share the numbers of the registry staff who will be of assistance. Please, if it's possible, kindly do so. Thank you.
That was Simon. Simon, please share.
I have already shared the contacts, but I can I'll post them again for the third time. I'll post them in the chat.
Could you upload this as a file? Probably the word as a Word document. People can just download and be done with it.
Okay. Anne Mureithi?
Okay, my question is, in the system, when you go to, okay, my name is Anne Mureithi, I'm a CS. I just wanted to find out, in the system, when you're updating the beneficial ownership details and you want to link that beneficial owner to the company, and when you click on the shareholder, the name of the company doesn't appear, then how do you resolve that issue? And is it something that the BRS is working on?
Okay, if I got
That is
you.
one question. The other question is, I have 3 shareholders jointly owning a company that is a shareholder in another company. How do I do the beneficial ownership details of the 3 who jointly owns the company?
So I think it will be useful for you and to just go through the scenarios we went through for you to be able to see how the identification of the beneficial owner is. But even going back to what I was just showing you on the portal, on the test server, the starting point of all this process is that you have to allocate the beneficial interest for each of the shareholders. So you start with update BO, you indicate what they hold directly and what they hold indirectly. In your case, for the company, you will indicate that the company holds 100% indirectly. Then when you come to appointment, you appoint the individuals one at a time, and under their location, select the name of the company as indirect shares and percentages, put 33.33%. In as much as we were saying earlier on that you do not prorate shareholding, the system has not caught out, has not caught up with that. So if you have 100%, give 33% to that person and identify them as a beneficial owner for purposes of the company we are filing. So please follow the step-by-step process in arriving at the 3 individuals being indirect shareholders after you have allocated that 100% to that holding company.
Okay, just a clarification.
The question as to why you will go to the list to appoint and do not find someone is if you've not allocated, you've not done the beneficial ownership allocation that then makes this person appear either under direct shareholding or indirect shareholding. So you have to start from the beginning, update BO, allocate, then go to appointment for you to be able to allocate those interests to third parties.
Yes, Anne?
Okay, that other bit of allocating their shareholding, yeah, to the three shareholders who jointly own one company. Let me give some bit of more details. That company owns 24% shares in the entity updating. And therefore, when you talk about the 30, now I don't know whether 33%, because the 33% will have to subject it to 24%, which the company owns, then it will be less than 10%.
So at the appointment level, the percentage doesn't matter when you are doing the appointments. Even if you put 0.001%, it will still capture that person as a beneficial owner. So these are issues that we will address when the next phase of the development is done, so that the treatment for companies, especially the chain of control, where you have several companies, are then addressed practically in the system. Currently, it would appear as if you then take the last person and then prorate the shares being held. Even if there were 4 people, but only one, if there were 11 people and only one holds more than 10, you have to give the entire shareholding in Kenya to that one person for the system to allow you to proceed. So that will not be representative, because then it would appear that that person individually controls the entire stake in Kenya, when that is not the case. So the practice and the theory are a little bit disjointed at the moment, because the system is not fully developed.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And there are questions around when you're registering a company. So, and I want to speak to all these questions in one go, and say, when you're registering a company and you get to the point in the system where it asks you for shareholding, again, like we have said, it's important that where the shareholders hold the shares in their own behalf. So it's a company I'm registering that I fully own 100%, that I indicate directly, that I indicate that I hold those shares and I own those shares directly. If I indicate that I own 50% of those shares and I indirectly, I directly own only 25%, then you will need to move on to the next tab under the incorporation, which is a tab on beneficial ownership, and add the beneficial owners of that particular company. However, where you have allocated the whole 100% to the shareholders and they hold that amount directly, you do not need to then appoint anyone at the section on beneficial owners. So it's very important, as you're ticking, as you're filling in information, that you have the information of the BOs way in advance before you start. Okay, so I guess that should address incorporation.
To just add on what Simon has been clarifying, the system is easy. What you put in is what you get out. If you indicate someone is indirect when they are not indirect, you are going to have problems, because the output is not going to reconcile with what you have in mind, and vice versa. If you say someone has a direct or indirect right under criteria 3 and 4, the system will require you to then appoint them as a beneficial owner, which, if that's not the case, it will give you a lot of problems. So members should be cautious to ensure that you put in the correct information so that the output is correct. Simon?
Thank you, Malakai. What happens to a private limited company that was registered 3 years ago but has been dormant since then? If you have no use of that company, update the compliance, and compliance is not only BO, but also your other statutory compliance, your annual returns and your changes in directors, and then apply for strike-off. That's the simple answer I can give you. Yes, Maria. Alternatively, you can maintain the dormant, you can maintain a dormant status, but then you would still need to comply with filing of annual returns and updating your BO information. So there is no way out of this BO information unless you strike off, and unless you're sure that the strike off will be done, before the 31st of July. And that takes me to another question that has not been raised, but I'm sure is with some of us in our minds around what happens where a company is already undergoing the process of strike off. And my simple answer would be if you started the process of strike off before the 13th of October, which is when the system went live, and you had already lodged your application for strike off, then you could be it could be possible for you to not update BO information. However, where that process of strike off is not done up to now, and the company is still online, you still have the onus is on you to actually ensure that it is compliant. The same way you cannot strike off a company where you've not filed annual returns because that's a compliance issue. BO information also becomes a compliance issue. Okay. Would you advise that we file BO information now or wait until BRS handles the issue? Update what you can now. Compliance is compliance. Update your information now, and then you know, you'd rather be in a state where what you need to do is make a correction than that you're compliant. Just file your BO information as early as possible. Joy, I was fearing I would open a Pandora's box when I spoke about strike off. So again, this is not the forum for us to discuss strike off, so I'm sorry. I know, please refer to the comment I made about the Joint Liaison Committee, the JLC, come and raise your issues there. Parag Devani, your hand is up. Please unmute your microphone and ask your question.
Thank you, Simon, for the opportunity. My name is Parag Devani. I'm based in Mombasa. I was just wondering when, Malakai, you said that where there is a joint shareholding between two individuals, for example, husband and wife, each of them should be disclosed with the same percentage of shareholding. So says they're holding 30% jointly, then while completing the BO, each should be indicated to be holding 30%. I believe I understood your response to that correctly. Then what I'm wondering is that will the total number of shareholding not exceed 100%?
Indeed, it would. The system currently as is, there are two registers we are addressing here. There's the register of beneficial owners being maintained by the company. Then there is from BOF1, a notification with the register of companies. Now, in your register of beneficial owners, you have control on the data you insert in it, and you are not limited by the formulas in the BRS portal. So in the register of beneficial owners currently, put it as suggested. In the BOF1, because the system is limited to 100%, if you are to do that for joint shareholders, then the percentage would exceed because it will just add them up. It will not even allow you to allocate more than 30% for that joint shareholding. So in this case, you will have to put, you will have to prorate it. So there's a gap, as I mentioned. The theory and the practice are not aligned at the moment because the BRS system is not fully developed. So that's one of the things we've raised with the developers, and probably in the second or later versions of this workflow, you will see that coming through, together with the other missing gaps we have identified.
Thank you for that response. Simon, will you permit me one more question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Okay, Malakai, in your presentation for the test company Mauritius Limited, which is holding 60%, we are saying the shareholding is 60%, but direct is 0%, indirect is 0%. That means we got to transfer the shares to the individual, the ultimate individual. Is that correct? That percentage of shares?
So the percentages, in the company, we recognize them as 0 so that they are all indirect. Then when we appoint now individuals, we allocate those shares to the individuals because only individuals can go into the register, not legal persons.
Right, so but this would be indirect.
Yes, so if there is a person, one person, then we will give them 60% indirect.
Thank you for that clarification.
Okay. What is our hard? How many more questions can we have? Simon, Gilbert?
I can't see any. I can't see any other hands up. Okay,
I can see
Galaxy A21, Galaxy, and then Silas Nalianya. Let's take those two. So unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and where you're from, and then just ask your question.
Thanks. My name is Silas Nalianya. I'm in Nairobi. Just a quick question, because based on what you're seeing, it looks like there are so many inconsistencies with the system at the moment, and whatever we are filing is actually not correct for most of the companies that we filed. So what recourse is the registrar going to take? Because you understand that filing of information that is not correct is actually an offense. That's my question.
Okay. That's an interesting.
Yeah.
That's a good question, Silas. Thank you for that question.
I was hoping Joyce would be here so that I can push this to her. Joyce, please raise your hand if you are on the call. This is Joyce Koech, the Registrar of Companies.
Even if she's here, I'm sure she's using a pseudonym. But yes, so there, like you said, there are discussions going on around the issue of the system and what information is being updated. Again, we keep interacting and engaging BRS on these issues, and we have kept doing this through the joint committee, ICS, LSK, Nairobi, and BRS. And so we will allow us to keep pushing, and then we will revert. What I do know is that the registry is keen to have stakeholder input and engagement. And one of the ways we can do this is what Malakai is asking. So Silas, please put that question on the Google form that we have put in.
Absolutely.
And allow me to end it there. Galaxy A21, please just introduce yourself and ask a question. Galaxy?
Please unmute yourself and ask your question. Looks like some audio issue.
Yeah. Yep.
You can type your question. We can't hear you.
We can't hear you, Galaxy. Sorry. Again, I'll ask if there are any other questions. In which case, I think we can take 2 more before we end this.
And as we go towards ending this, I'm appealing to members. We need your feedback on the Google form. The response is not as overwhelming as I expected, but please do add your voices with us, whether you're an advocate or a CS please leave your details and endorse the recommendations so that we can communicate this to the registrar as the outcome of this engagement with stakeholders.
Okay, Galaxy, please speak. I have tried to unmute you. I've given you permission. Okay, we seem to have an issue with Galaxy. Sorry. We have a
There's
question.
a question.
Yep.
Go on.
Please advise whether there could be any future tax implication routed to the declared beneficial owner. I'm no tax expert, Malachi.
I'm no tax expert myself, but the purpose of the beneficial information disclosure is to fight money laundering, corruption, and financing of terrorism. Now, if the beneficial owner is caught out in any of those activities, or if the company is doing any of those activities, that will be traceable back to the beneficial owner. So I'm not sure under the corporate veil whether tax issues can attribute to shareholders, which by extension are related to the beneficial owners, highly unlikely, but there are instances where KRA has gone after shareholders and directors. So your circumstances really have to be determined at that point in time for any of tax liabilities of the company to be attributable to the beneficial owner. So my sense is that highly unlikely, but in this market, you never know what can come up depending on the activities of the company. So as I advise my clients, there is really no exposure to the beneficial owner as far as liabilities of the company goes due to the corporate veil principle, the limited liability principle.
Okay. There's a question where a company does not have a natural person meeting any of the 4 criteria. Can they use an authorized representative for purposes of completing the incorporation? So if I get this question right, the question is whether you can appoint a nominee to be declared as BO for purposes of incorporation. That for me is circumventing the law. I don't have a yes or no response, but I don't think it sounds right.
I think I'll help you on that. The answer is no.
Yeah, so you would need to explain why there's no person that meets the criteria, and BRS should be able to take you up on your explanation and proceed with the registration.
So the issue here, Simon, is you have someone who has more than 10%. Now, in the example you are telling me is that there's no one who meets 10%. The system should ignore everyone who does not.
No. So this is coming in where the shareholder is a corporate, 100% corporate owned, but the corporate does not have a BO.
So this will fall under the second development, where we have requested for a feature where if that is the case, then you just indicate that this company, even though they meet the requirement on minimum shareholding, behind the corporate person, there is no one who meets this threshold. And hopefully that will be in the second round of development, which should be soon enough. Okay. There's a hand from Isaac Chege.
Yep, as I allow him to speak and he unmutes himself, Galaxy A21 has been able to type his question. Thank you, FCS.
Her question.
Oh, her question. Yes, Bina Dawani from Mombasa. It's about registration of BO. Simon said that there's no compulsion. Well, I did not say it's not compulsory to file your BO information. it is mandatory to file your BO information. The BO register is what I said, you know, I would advise and highly encourage you to maintain a register, a separate register. Whatever you file as the BOF1 is not necessarily the register, unless you take it up after you've seen the template we've given you and it does not work for you. If you then take the BOF1 to be your BO register, you will have some missing information. You will not have the link to the shareholders. You will not have the write-up around how Malachi all of a sudden appears as the BO to company XYZ Limited. So that's why it's good that you maintain the register, and it's mandatory that you file the BO information. So I hope that
Simon, I have a rejoinder to that comment. It's a question of chicken and egg. What comes first? Is it the chicken? Is it the egg? Now, the Act requires that you prepare your register of beneficial owners, and within 30 days of preparing it, file the BOF1. Now, how will you file the BOF1 if you've not prepared the register? I leave that to you as a practitioner to answer. Where are you going to extract the information in the BOF1 if you don't have a register in the first place? And what timeline, if you've not prepared the register, this 30 days, how are you going to compute compliance? So really, in my interpretation, the first thing you need to do is prepare the register, then extract the information, complete BOF1, and file that within 30 days of you having prepared the register. So in my interpretation, the maintaining of the register at the company level is mandatory, because otherwise the timelines we are talking about, how do they crystallize if the register does not exist in the first place? So if your interpretation is that BOF1 is the register, I'll leave it to you. But if you need to prepare a register, and then out of that register, the register is the egg or the chicken, then you determine how you go about it.
Thank you, Malachi. Isaac Chege, sorry for keeping you waiting.
Thank you. My question is very simple. I wanted to find out whether a minor can be a beneficial owner.
Okay, whether a minor can be a beneficial owner. Thank you for your question, Malachi.
We've answered this before, and it's still yes.
Yeah, so there is a concern about whether there'd be a conflict of laws if we disclose the minor, because minors are generally protected under law. But again, the regulations do accept that you can have a minor as a reportable BO, and they do provide for their identification document to be the birth certificate. So it's again, it's a question of discretion, and it's a question that you know, put it on the list on the Google Forms. Let's throw that question to.
So Simon, maybe in addition to that, I can now appoint a minor as a shareholder. Yeah. What prevents me from disclosing, if they're holding those shares in their own interest, from disclosing them as a direct shareholder? Yeah. There are instances where they are already in the register. Then the issues of protection, I don't think would then apply, because we have a lot of companies where minors are included in the register as the shareholders. And now where you have to go through a nominee or a trustee to get to the minor, I think that's where now the issues of protection and discretion would now come in. But by all means, please include it in the Google form, and we'll pick it up in our next discussions at the technical subcommittee with the registrar.
Okay, so thank you guys. CS Peterson Mwangi, I will allow you to speak, but before you unmute yourself, I'll take a few questions on the group. Dirango Ngonjiri, I don't know whether this is a question or it's a comment. The KRA will be able to follow tax liability issues after the BO process is complete. We have explained competent authorities who can have access to that information. I guess that answers that question. And yes, KRA are a part of competent authorities. Is it an offense to be an undisclosed BO? Yes, go back to our slides when we do this. When you identify someone as a BO and they do not want to be disclosed, there are steps as a practitioner you need to take, including giving the warning notice. So it would be good to just go through the regulations, which again, we will share with you if you already don't have those. And yes, it's an offense to do that. The format, how do you file the register? FCS, you don't file the register, you file the BOF1. So the register that we will share, as Malachi had alluded to earlier, is a register that we consider to be an electronic register. So you're filing this for your records. I'm not sure whether you file your register of members, you still have the hard copy register of members and directors. If you do, well and good. If you're putting that online, then well and good as well. The register, the format we are sharing is not for filing with the registrar of companies. And mark you, the register the template we are sharing will have much more information than the BOF1. It is not for filing with the registrar, it is for your records.
And a disclaimer on this, Simon, we are providing this from a fellow practitioner to a fellow practitioner. This is not a prescribed document. It is at your board's discretion to adopt it. So let us just separate the two. What we are giving you as a template register is a suggestion. BOF1 is prescribed. So please don't confuse the two. They are separate.
Okay. Peterson Mwangi.
FCS Peterson.
Yes, SP, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Wow, this was a great, some great webinar. My concern is on the issue of the beneficial owner particulars, where you are saying you can get that information from that parties. I find that very, very dicey because at one time I saw a company I know and the media was saying somebody owns 70% and I knew he owns only 15%, which tells you that if you rely on that kind of information, you are going to be in a lot of trouble. I would encourage CSs to ensure that they get signed statements from the owners, because that is the only way they protect them. Basically, if you have to get to the bottom of this, it's like CSs are being converted to cacheros. What are they called in English? Investigators, because now you have to be a detective to know who owns what. And finally, it's becoming doing BO is full-time business now. And we need to take full advantage as CSs. So for people who are being worried that this thing is going to, or when the registrar says it's free, they are going to lose jobs. I think it is highly unlikely. People don't know how to do this kind of stuff, especially for businesses that have other underlying businesses. So thank you very much for the training. I just wanted to appreciate you.
Thank you, FCS. For
Thank
those
you,
people
FCS.
who are worried that the recent public notices from the registrar is taking business from us, please rest assured this process is not straightforward. You have to understand it. Even from this presentation alone, I don't think a lay director would understand this and file a proper Form BOF1 and maintain the registers. So we outline the scope to our clients and we leave them to agree to pay or not pay our fee proposal, the fee proposed. So moving
All
on
right.
to the next item.
Yeah, so we've got 3 more hands. I'll ask that we don't take any more questions after this. So I'll allow Jacko Ching, Sarah Ogwile, and Wairimu Wayaki to be the last questions we deal with. We have so far answered almost 160 questions.
Shareholders are to be held on.
Okay, Wairimu, please mute yourself if you're not speaking. Okay, so Sarah Ogwile, you can go first. Sarah?
Hello, hi.
Hi.
Thank you for the session. It has been quite informative. I have a question relating to issues of CAs who are also employees. If the shareholders or the beneficial ownership do not wish to disclose, they may be appearing as shareholders on the issue on the CR12, but maybe on the issue of disclosure. Whether it is they are the owners or they're holding in trust, they do not wish to disclose that, and you have the right to give the notice, you give. But how do you balance that? Because they are putting the CAs in a shoe where it is you're being held personally liable, but you're not in control of every motion or the decisions the owners will take in terms of disclosure. So will you go ahead and file, having given them notice, and you're also an employee? How do you balance that? Hello.
I think we had a technical issue.
Yes.
Oh, sorry about that. Malaka, you're back?
I'm back now.
Okay. Sarah, sorry, you were saying?
I was saying, in an instance where you're in-house, you're a CS and you're also an employee, maybe you're taking up other different roles, and the beneficial owners do not wish to disclose. You give them the notice as per the regulations, the notices that are supposed to be given. After the time lapses and they're not willing to comply, are you supposed to go ahead and file, indicating them as the beneficial owners when they have not confirmed or they have not given you anything? What happens in that situation? Because you're being put in a situation where it is deemed that you are the one to ensure compliance, but also in terms of disclosure, you are relying on third parties. You're relying on other people to give you that direction.
The new term for companies who are employees should be executive company secretary. Does that sound better? Sarah, we do appreciate that the Companies Act places the onus on compliance to officers of the company. The officers of the company are the directors and the company secretary. Where the directors are of the opinion that the company should not comply, as the company secretary, you need to document the process of notification you do to the board and to the company generally that this is a legal requirement. And if they then fail to respond to you, to put you in a position where you can file the required forms, then you have evidence. And it is a defense if you can prove that you did your part as the secretary, but the people who should disclose or pass the resolutions to issue restriction notices against that shareholding did not do their part. So in your role as the secretary, ensure that where briefs are supposed to be given, you give that in good time, within prescribed time. When someone meets the 10% threshold, do a formal communication to the directors, probably through an email, or if you prefer through a letter, which is addressed to the chairman of the board. And then just document that you've done your part, because the compliance is not negotiable. And the truth of the matter is, if the board directors tell you don't, then it comes back to bite them. They will hang you to dry. They will say you never told them. If you don't have any document to show that you told them, the onus is on you, because it's your duty. The compliance function sits squarely with the company secretary. So if the board claims you never advised them, then they move the responsibility from the board of directors to your doorstep. Then you become personally liable under the Act for non-compliance. So just to cover yourself, do your part. And if the company decides not to comply, have some documentary evidence to that effect.
Okay, and that answers FCS.
And unless Simon, in his wide experience, also wants to add something.
No. I think the defense here is, you can show clearly that you did give notice and you did communicate the responsibility of the board, and you should be okay when that comes on. So I've got nothing useful to add, really. But I feel you, and I feel someone, FCS from Mombasa, who said, it's difficult to give a warning notice to your boss if you're in-house. But again, it won't be you as the CS giving the warning notice. Board decision. So if it's a board decision, then you're protected, quote unquote. Before we hear from Wairimu Wayaki, 2 questions. If the county government is the majority shareholder, and this we spoke of when we were talking about these entities like state corporations, and county governments will fall in there. It's a discussion that we need to hold. Essentially, it's difficult to tie in one specific individual or the shots. Because again, the governor is elected by the people, so he's answerable to the people. You can't really put the governor as the BO. Can he take decisions on his own accord without consulting, without getting direction from other stakeholders? I don't think so. So it's a bit of an unclear instance at the moment. So this we can flag, just raise it. Please put the question the way it is on the Google Forms, and it will be answered by BRS. How can potential beneficial owners be protected from being registered as such without their knowledge? Potential beneficial owners, that term in itself, I don't think it would exist. How would you be a potential beneficial owner? You are either a beneficial owner or not. Can you get information lodged without you knowing? You will once you're uploaded as a BO, then the company will, company or a strange company appears on your list. the onus is on you really to go and seek clarity from the company and from the BRS as to why that appears. Wairimu? I have allowed you to speak. Wairimu Wayaki?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to raise the issue about the registrar's notice in public, stating that it was an easy exercise and no one should ask for any money for it. Can you, is there a way that you may approach the registrar about it? Because it's actually affected the public's response to us writing to them, telling them about the bill. They're actually ignoring us because it's an easy task. They've been told so in public. And so they don't see why they should pay for anything. They can do it themselves. And in one of my WhatsApp groups, as I was approaching them, telling them, you know, please make sure you file by this date and everything, the first deadline, one of them wrote back and said, oh, it's an easy exercise. It's just a few minutes. Don't worry about it. We can do it ourselves. So there is an effect, and it's a real effect on us.
Indeed, there is, Malachi.
Simon, allow me to give a response that might not sit well. Now, we received this notice, and even in the WhatsApp group for Team CPS, there was a lot of backlash on this particular notice. Now, when we look at it from the point of view of a practitioner, it's a bad notice. And at the same time, if you look at it from the point of view of government, BRS, it's a good notice. And this is the reason, based on my discussions with the registry over time. Now, the notices that practitioners were sending out to their clients was to the effect that this is a complex process that they must engage an advocate or a CS to do. Otherwise, the penalty for 500,000 shillings would crystallize. So the messaging that then went out to the public is that the government has introduced a complex system that an ordinary user cannot understand unless they engage the services of a lawyer, of an advocate, or of a CS, which goes contrary to the ease of doing business. If it's so complex that an ordinary citizen cannot do it, then it's not proper for what agenda the BRS is trying to drive. So the truth of the matter is that if you understand the process, and if you know what the process entails, it's a simple and free service. However, because our directors and our shareholders are not in the business of understanding BRS processes and understanding the company law and BO regulations, it is not simple to them. So it is upon you as a practitioner to tell them that, by the way, it is simple if you understand, but do remember that by going to the system, when you do not understand, there is a penalty for providing misleading information, which is in the Act. So it is how you advise your clients or how you package your proposal that will make your client look. It's the same as filing an annual return. It's a simple and straightforward process. Filing changes in directors, it's simple. From the point of view of government, it's simple and it is free. But from our point of view as practitioners and the people who are advising our clients, it would add value how we then package this and talk to our clients. And I can tell you, Iremu, I have a client who has elected to do this themselves. I have it in writing. I gave my proposal. They said, no, this is a simple and free service. We are going to do it ourselves. I have it on email. If anything comes out of that process, I'm already covered as the CS in that company. So it's the way you structure the practice, the way you structure the engagement with the client on this matter that will affect the outcome should this process come back to be a thorn in everyone's flesh down the road. So I've given you my view as a practitioner and what I believe. That's not the view of BRS, disclaimer. That's my take on what I understand would be the view based on the ease of doing business processes. Simon, anything to add?
No, nothing to add really. It's about value addition. It's the value proposition that you make to your client that really answers that. But where the client has outright refused, like Malachi has said, and they've said it's an easy process, just make sure it's in writing. And when they go and mess up and they come for you to correct, please be sure to double the fee you had quoted initially, and don't quote me.
The initial
Daniel
fee.
Muredi. Daniel Muredi is the last question, and then we'll hand it back to Daniel. If you could unmute yourself.
Daniel, you
Hello, good afternoon.
Yes.
Good. My name is Daniel, and I really want to thank you for this very elaborate webinar that we've had this day. Good job to both of you, Simon and Malachi. We really appreciate. Now, for me, I'm still green in this perspective, so to speak, and mine is just I'm just giving an example of an encounter that I had with, going through the BU filing. I have a company that has 2 direct shareholders. And of course, there's that bit where the ownership is already input. There's nothing you can do about it. But when you go to input in the other direct ownership in percentage, of course, it tells you it cannot be blank. But whichever number you allocate, it doesn't want it. You go to total voting rights, fine. You can input some details, but to me, some of them are not necessary. Then there's a bit of type of control direct, type of right to appoint directors is also direct, then you input. So it cannot move from that bit. And I'm wondering, where am I going wrong? Yes.
Simon?
Well, I'd again, and I think you can reach out privately on this. Some of these are user issues. Some of these are system issues. I'm not sure what to say.
For the purpose of everyone, I think this is a pretty specific and personal case. We can take Daniel. I allow you to reach out directly to Simon. He can give you a few pointers here and there to address this specific issue, because we are a bit conscious of time. We were hoping we will close by 12:45 latest. And before going back to the Institute, I wanted to invite back Mr. Eric Theory to give a few remarks, bid his members farewell, and then we can call upon the Institute to also talk to their members before we bring this to a close. So Daniel and Simon, you can connect on the chat function, and we call it a day. Over to you, Bwana Theory.
Oh, thank you so much, Malachi, Kariuki. This is one of those sessions. If we were in the Nyayo era, you would have earned ile makofi ya kilo. It's it's been almost an information overload, but quite engaging, very, very practical. And I think in as much as some of those questions may have been answered in other sessions before, I think today was an opportunity to further clarify those various scenarios that you presented. And I think we owe you a debt of gratitude for the really the extremely good work that you have done. And I think that it is abundantly clear that for some of us, we now need to refresh our notes, because contrary to what a lot of people may be thinking, there is quite some work to be done in this area. And so we want to thank you for that. I just want to thank all the, of course, the advocates and also the members of the Institute who have joined us today. We encourage, especially the advocates, to keep getting in touch with us, because our members still sit in the joint committee, and they are able to present your concerns as and when you raise them with us, so they would find their way to the BRS. And I think, Malachi, maybe what we now need to do, because the last two sessions we have missed a representation from the registry, perhaps we now need to, once we have collected the issues that will be coming out, that have come up in the Google form, perhaps then we need to organize another session where the registry would come in and they would be able to respond to the questions that have been put out with regards to the processes in the registry, depending also on the kind of feedback that they would have given to the joint technical team that is handling this. Because I think we've been having a conversation between ourselves. Of course, we appreciate what they are doing, but it would also be nice if we can get them on board to just come and also respond to some of those issues, especially if there would have been no clear responses to some of the questions that would have been posed. So we want to just urge the members again, although this has been a clarion call that has been made once or twice, let us pick out that Google form so that we can give the feedback, because it is that feedback that enables us to improve the system. So Malachi, Karaoke, asanteni sana. We are really, really grateful to you. To all the members of LSK who have joined in, we hope that this session has been of benefit to you and to your practice. So this being a Friday, I can only wish you a nice and pleasant weekend, and enjoy the rest of your day. Asante sana.
Thank you much. The overarching request on the is that after this, we would request that we do a joint communication between LSK Nairobi and ICS, submitting this as feedback from our practitioners for the registry to consider, and that will then lead to that tripartite meeting between ICS, LSK Nairobi, and BRS. Over to you, Kiprono. I'm not sure if the CEO
Thank you very much, Malachi. Mine is just to, he's not around. Okay. He has asked me to close. Okay, mine is to thank the participants, and also thank CS Malachi and CS Simon for very, very insightful presentation. I want to also thank all the participants for joining in. And maybe before we close, I wanted to just highlight some of the things that we also do at the Institute. Just a minute. Apart from today's webinar, which has gone successfully, we are also having other upcoming events. Next week, we are having a webinar on emerging role of a company corporate secretary for future boards. It's a webinar that will run for 2 hours between 9 and 11 a.m. I have the link there. We will also share the same here, even on this platform, and also on email. We have another workshop, like there is going to take place next week on boards and senior management on effective meetings. That will be between 25th to 26th of February, and it will be held at Sarova Pan-Africa. We encourage members and even non-members to book. So all members of the Institute who are here in, and also even the members of LSK Nairobi branch, to also join in and also participate in other events that we have. We have also another one on 2nd March, board governance and leadership workshop to be held in Mombasa. Kindly book your space, and I know it will be very, very enjoyable session. We will also share our calendar of events for the year 2021, and so that in case you need to attend or you would want to attend our events, you can attend. For our members, we encourage you to attend this event so that you can comply with the CPD policy, and so that you're not put in trouble when you are asked for a certificate of good standing. Otherwise, thank you very much. And before we close, I want to just recite the national anthem, and we call it a day. And I wish all of you a very, very good weekend. This is on a Friday. Thank you very much. O God of all creation, bless this our land and nation. Justice be our shield and defender. May we dwell in unity, peace and liberty. Plenty be found within our borders. Thank you very much and have a good weekend.